Hey, welcome to another segment of Sweaty Comic Book Nerds. I'm Jon Schnepp, and sitting across from me is ComicBookGirl19. 19, how's it going?
Great. Glad to be here.
Well, thanks for coming. Today, we are going to talk about the one and only, the amazing, the Dark Knight, Batman. And we're going to talk about some of the greatest appearances, some of the best artists, some of the amazing writers who've had a great turn with this character. Let's start with you first.
And there are tons of great Batman titles. I mean, it was really hard for me to just narrow it down to two. But I would like to start with Hush. Jeff Loeb and Jim Lee doing it. It's a great one if you just want to see all the different villains going, and it's a good mystery, and the scenes with Catwoman are really hot. That's a really fun one that I highly recommend. Yeah,
and also let Jim Lee kind of play in the Batman universe again. Like he did do that. Hush was that his very first Batman, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, he basically every issue had a different villain in it. It was almost like the Jeff Loeb, how do you say his last name?
Sale? I think it's a Sale.
Okay, Sale.
That's what I've heard.
Come sail away, come sail. I think it's Sale. So yeah, it was like the the Halloween, like where each episode had a different villain. So this one, Jim Lee got to play with Killer Croc, his version of it. His version of the Joker. So, but yeah, Hush also great villain. For me, obviously, we're going to talk about The Dark Knight Returns and they go together year one.
Yeah.
I mean, David Mazzucchelli. Unfortunately, he kind of retired from regular superheroes after he did his run on Daredevil, and then he did Batman. He's done a couple of independent comic books, which are great. I don't know if he'll ever return to superhero comics, but he really he knocked it out of the park.
Mazzucchelli's artwork is just so strong. It's always so strong, and it's so funny to see things like Daredevil Born Again, where it's this completely different style from what he does with Batman Year One, but it's still just so amazing. Love his work.
Yeah, another amazing Batman story that I'm sure you've heard of, but you really deserve to give yourself a chance to read it is The Killing Joke. It's Alan Moore and Brian Boland. An incredible, self-contained, I think a 48-page amazing story dealing with Batman and his yin-yang Joker relationship and how they actually, are brutal friends, you could almost say.
Yeah, and it's just such a big one in the Batman mythos because this is the one where Barbara Gordon gets shot, senselessly shot in the spine, and it puts her in a wheelchair and starts her whole Oracle thing and all of that follows afterwards. Although now she's out of the wheelchair again, finally. But she was in that wheelchair for a while, and this is where that came from.
Another one to touch on is going back in time. We could talk about the Denny O'Neil, Neal Adams Batman run, which basically kind of put the Dark Knight back into Batman. And then a couple years later, in the early '80s, right before Frank Miller took over, and made Batman who he is now, we had a run by Mike Barr and Alan Davis, which was a real fun run for Batman. It was almost like Adam West, the funny Batman, meets this kind of darker Batman, but they just hadn't figured it out yet. And then once Frank Miller nailed it, that became what Batman is.
Yeah. Another great one, if you are not necessarily into superheroes and you're not necessarily into Bruce Wayne, but you're curious about getting into superhero comics, I would say Batman Year 100 by Paul Pope is something to check out because there's no Bruce Wayne in it. It's the idea of Batman in the future. You see Gotham, it's become this overbearing police state. It's got really cool independent indie art by Paul Pope.
I mean, if you've never seen Paul Pope, Heavy Liquid, this guy is a genius, and his take on Batman is insane. I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hey, that's it for us talking about the amazing Batman character. Come back next time. We'll talk more about other characters and superheroes and what other comics you should be checking out that those characters have been in. So I'd like to thank ComicBookGirl19 for being here. Where can people find you online?
You can find me on YouTube. You just got to search for ComicBookGirl19. In fact, you just do ComicBookG and I'll pop up, generally speaking.
Awesome.
Also my website, ComicBookGirl19.com.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for tuning in to Comic Book Sweat Fest. It's a sweaty comic book nerds. I'll see you guys next time. For more of the Sweaty Nerd Show, just subscribe at the bottom there to theStreamtv and you can check out Get More Sweat.